Hi everyone, welcome. It's another edition of the BC Poly Hot Stove. Yes, the legislature may be deserted, but not for one. I was going to call it one small guy. I'm sorry. I was going for like the church mouse.
I've already got mouse issues thanks to
I
George
know.
and Jody. You're
I know.
not helping.
Darn it, underscore. You're ruining my whole train of thought here. All right, we're back. It's Jordan Bateman. I'm the Vice President of Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association. I'm here in Metrotown in Burnaby.
And I am Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca. I'm in the very deserted legislature. Jordan and I, you and I were just talking before we went on air. I've been in the legislature in some form or another since 2010. I don't ever remember seeing it this much of a ghost town. It's just completely deserted today.
That's interesting. I guess. Well, you know what? Last summer crazy? I'm trying to remember. Was it 2 summers ago that was crazy?
It was 2 summers ago. It was crazy. It's amazing how it kind of blends. Yeah, it was 2 summers ago that was crazy.
It's all crazy, I suppose. But yeah, I guess the most of the gallery's probably out on vacation, and we know Alan Mullen. He's out driving the country, but we'll talk about that in a second. Maclean, I did some reading, and I wrote a piece for the Orca, and it's gaining quite a bit of attention online and in the mainstream media. For Pete's sake, I made BC Today. I mean, I'm in big time now.
Wow.
I read the book.
That's not how we expected you would make it into the pages of BC Today.
It's true. But I read the great book, The Essentials of Leadership in Government, Understanding the Basics, by 3 authors, Colette Squires, Len Garris, and one Darryl Plecas.
We're going to talk about this, but the first and most obvious question is, were you inspired?
Oh my God, you have no idea. By the way, a second edition. I wasn't quick enough to get the first edition. But nonetheless, look, I have a master's in leadership from Royal Roads University. I've read a lot of leadership books. You know, you do the textbooks and stuff like that. This was not the greatest. It was a regurgitation of many other people's thoughts on leadership. I believed I called it a series of harmless listicles,
Yes.
which is, you know, I think a pretty fair way of determining. It's not going to it's not going to replace anything. It's not going to replace, say, Peter Drucker or Good to Great or anything like that. It is very. You know, it's very surface when it comes to the practice of leadership. But it's only of interest because of the guy who wrote it, of course, Darryl Plecas, the Speaker of the House. And here he is. He has a book telling people how to lead greatly, how to lead wisely, how to lead in a way that builds teams. And meanwhile, you compare it to his leadership practice in the legislature, and it's like two different human beings. It's kind of shocking how at odds his practice is with his book.
Yeah, well, when I went on CKNW with our good friend Jody Vance yesterday to talk about this piece because it has, as you say, it got a lot of attention. And the way I described Darryl's, the speaker's sort of visions on leadership is it's kind of a series of inoffensive bromides, right? It's sort of truisms that of course you should foster a spirit of trust in the workplace. I mean, no one's going to object to that. It's also not particularly helpful or insightful, and least of all original. But the problem is, it's hard to reconcile this sort of very high-minded, if somewhat generic philosophy on leadership with the deputy speak of the legislature leaving her office in tears, or people talking about going to meetings where he is pounding the desk with his hand and saying liar and saying he knows how to get people, and it's just you have to kind of be here, admittedly today on an empty day, to get just how different the legislature feels in the last sort of 8 months or so. It's tense. It's paranoid. I referenced in a piece a few weeks back about rumors that someone was going through offices late at night. I wasn't making that up. Those rumors have been much discussed here for months, and it turned out that probably was happening. So, I mean, the atmosphere that has been fostered here in the legislature is a far cry from the very generic and inoffensive book that you read over the weekend. I was going to say suffered through. Haven't read it. Shouldn't have said that.
No, look, I mean, it's a light read. It'll take you less than an hour to zip through it. But here's a few. I want to comment. Like on Facebook, it's drawing a lot of comments from both. There's no middle ground with Darryl Plecas. You either love him or you hate him. He's a little bit Donald Trump-like in that sense. The people who love him will defend him to the death no matter what he says or what he does. And the people who hate him, vice versa, will kick the snot out of him just because. But let me just talk about a couple of the common complaints in the in the Facebook comment section because I think it's important to talk about. First of all, just because a guy ferrets out, one bad apple, and I think it's fair to say Craig James, he resigned in disgrace. Clearly, Beverly McLaughlin backed up, I believe, 4 of the 8 kind of allegations against him. Not every allegation that Darryl Plecas made, but 4 of the 8. Obviously, there was a culture of entitlement in the clerk's office there that caused, spending scandals and very, very poor practice. But just because that one person on your team was a bad apple doesn't mean you have the right to be suspicious or angry or vicious to every other person working for you. And that's not the sign of a good leader. That's the sign of a very poor leader, by any standard and by the standard laid out in the Essentials of Leadership and Government by Darryl Plecas. And yet, we have this sense that, he's now after Gary Lenz, the meeting with the House leaders, I'm going to get this guy, I can still get this guy. Beverly McLaughlin's report was, dumb, and she's stupid. Like, those are comments that do not inspire anything in a leader or anything from people looking to follow a leader. So, okay, great. He found Craig James, fantastic. We all agree the wood splitter, which, by the way, was bought in the fall of 2017 on the NDP and Darryl Plecas' watch, not on the BC Liberals' watch. But whatever, I'm not quibbling. Wood splitters are stupid. We should own one as taxpayers. Certainly not for the legislature. But, okay, he caught that guy. That doesn't mean Gary Lenz is guilty. And in fact, Gary Lenz was exonerated by a former Supreme Court justice who looked hard into these things. Now he's the subject of another investigation, which we'll talk about in a second. But he's not guilty. You look at Kate Ryan Lloyd, pardon me. She has 3 first names. She has 3 first names. It's very confusing for me. But Kate Ryan Lloyd, who, by all accounts, of the 87 MLAs, 85 of them really think very highly of her. The 2 who don't, one happens to be the Speaker, one happens to be the leader of the third party, but that's another story. So, she's well thought of by everyone. She actually, when Craig James was doing stuff, she was one of the people who said, that doesn't seem right to me, and rejected payments, that Craig James took. She said, no way, no thank you. That's the kind of person you want to encourage. That's the kind of person you want to be a shining star. And if you read the Essentials of Leadership, that's exactly the kind of person you want to build around. And yet he's driving her out of meetings, high-level meetings, in tears, to the point where the media, who, media, not the most sensitive group of people in the world, feel badly for her and see her, crying as she's coming down the hall. And, what's going on, Kate? What's going on? And, multiple times she's coming out of these meetings like this. That is not good leadership. And just because he caught Craig James with his hand in the cookie jar does not give you a blank check to treat every single person under your employee like crap. And, I have a real problem with these people who blindly think, I'm sorry, not everyone in the legislature is corrupt.
Yeah, not everyone is corrupt, and the Speaker is a human being who look. There has to be some room for nuance here. Yes, it is a fact that he did uncover some wrongdoing and some ethical breaches by the former clerk Craig James. That's not disputed. It is also not disputed that the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court criticized him heavily for focusing on conducting, as she called it, police-style investigations rather than the day-to-day business of running the legislature and maintaining a nonpartisan air in the office. That is also a fact. Mm-hmm. So, it's obviously, as you say, it's not possible, or at least we should at least consider the possibility that he could be right about some things and wrong about other things, as is the case for most of us.
Yeah, and I'm also, we shouldn't let him off the hook. He signed off on a number of these expenses.
Yep.
I'm a boss. I have a few employees who report to me, and I have to sign their expense forms every month. Mm-hmm. And you know what? My boss holds me accountable. If they're defrauding us, it's my job to catch it. It's my job to catch it and address it at the time, not sign it, let them get a check, and then secretly tiptoe to the police or something and try to build a case against them. That's ridiculous leadership practice. You correct it in the moment, and mm-hmm. You say, look, how does this fit in? This doesn't make any sense. So, not everything, just because he managed to catch, and even blind squirrels find nuts once in a while, even though he managed to catch one guy, I just keep coming back to not everyone in that organization is corrupt. And he talks about wanting to build trust, giving your team a chance. And what does he do? He goes out and hires Alan Mullen because he feels like there's no one he can trust in the entire legislature. And then doesn't just hire him as an advisor, but tries to install him as a sergeant at arms Look, it's okay. You can thank Darryl Plecas for his service in uncovering what Craig James was doing, and still hold him to account for the way he's treating the rest of the staff.
Absolutely right. And let's talk about Alan Mullen, because he's also in the news this week. He is on a road trip as we speak. He is not in the, well, I say he's not in the province. I don't actually know that, because the issue is not that he is on a work road trip. This is not a vacation. It's that we don't know where he's going. He's off on a road trip, as he described it, to find best practices and sort of talk to peers and colleagues at legislatures and, I guess, state governors' residences in the United States. We don't know, because, again, that was one of the questions he couldn't answer is, will you be leaving the country? Well, not sure. The other thing is, we're doing this, if he's doing this in the summer, it's not like you can walk up to the legislature in Regina and say, hello, is the premier, and can he come out and play? Or the speaker or the sergeant at arms. I mean, these are things usually you have to set up in advance. So it's exactly the kind of thing that, had this been Craig James or Gary Lenz, he would have quite rightly criticized as, at the very least, being inadequate.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Like, it'd be one thing if he came out and said, look, here's a list of the meetings I plan to have. Click, 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 click. And then remember, we're not holding him to a practice that, I don't want to hold him to a practice that no one else does, but they've come out and said, Darryl Plecas and Alan Mullen have gone after James and Lenz on specifically these things. Therefore, when you do that, you have to have a higher level of disclosure yourself. Like, you've got to meet that standard yourself if you're going to try to hold other people to it. So if he comes out with a little schedule and it's like, oh, I'm going to meet this guy and this young one, we're going to go from here to Winnipeg and come back, and I decide to drive because whatever reason. Okay, we can talk about it. I do wonder at 52 cents a kilometer, which I believe is the standard kind of reimbursement, if it actually is cheaper to drive to Winnipeg than it is to, plus his time. I mean, he's going to be driving on work time, plus hotels and whatnot, if it is that much cheaper than flying. But nonetheless, look, I don't know. I keep waiting for the report from another province saying, envoy from the BC Speaker was in town and met with so-and-so and so-and-so. Like, none of that is coming out. I'm not sure it'd be terribly newsworthy, except for the fact that, it would give these other legislatures a chance to kind of point out how much better they are than BC.
That's right. Well, there are people watching this right now saying, is that really such a big deal? And then you're probably right. It's not a huge deal. But this is the same speaker who released a report trying to refute expense claims from years ago from Gary Lenz's wife. So far as looking at the exact amount spent on dinner and then comparing it with the current menu and saying it's just not likely that she would have only had the salad. I mean, this is insane. This is that is a very high level of detail that he was expecting on a single expense claim, and then to sign off on a road trip to not sure where, including possibly leaving the country, is, at the very least, it's a double standard.
Yeah, and to do what, and what's hoped for outcome, and it's weird. It's weird, and weird makes reporters' antennae go up. And I suspect that whenever Mr. Mullen gets back, he'll be expected to give a full report. And when he does, that will be very carefully matched with the experiences of the other provinces, because reporters know how to phone long distance.
That's the Speaker's office gave us both our big splashes this week. What do you have for sort of the ripple, the second story that we should keep an eye on?
Yeah, I think we should talk federal election polls.
Yes.
They're tightening. I guess Angus Reid still had the Conservatives out 6 points ahead of the Liberals. Ipsos Reid had an interesting one today. I think it had the Conservatives up 2 or 3, but more importantly, it had this really shocking number. Only 32% of Canadians believe that Justin Trudeau's Liberals have earned re-election. The other thing is, of all the 4 parties, the one whose support is the strongest and the unwavering group, the largest percentage of those votes are the Conservatives. And let me tell you, for someone who has worked with Hamish Marshall, who is the national campaign manager for the Conservatives. I remember when we did TransLink and we were behind in the polls at the very beginning. And, it's hard not to be a little bit demoralized when you're down 13 points or something like that on day one. And he sent me over the polling, a public poll that had been done, I think, by Mario Canseco, and he highlighted one fact. He said, "This is why we're going to win." And the reason we were going to win was because our support was not moving. Like something like 90% of the people who said they would not, who were going to vote against that TransLink tax were not going to be convinced. Whereas the other sides was wavering all over the place. He's like, we're going to win because we're going to pick off that group, and you watch. And he was right. And I do wonder if if he's sitting there looking at these numbers. I haven't talked to Hamish about any of this stuff, and it's none of my business. He's very busy running a national campaign. But I do wonder if he's sitting there looking at the same polls, kind of looking at his chops, thinking to himself, "This is why we're going to win. Our support's baked in, and all we got to do is pick off 5 or 7 points from the rest of these guys, and they are all pretty shaky."
Well, that's exactly it, and it also it plays into turnout as well. Motivated, convinced voters in any issue, referendum, or party are the ones who are going to turn up on election day. The people who look at the available choices and say, I don't really feel good about any of these, that is the platonic ideal of somebody who does not show up on election day. Yeah. Even if, 9 times out of 10, they might be inclined to vote, well, anything, NDP, Conservative, Liberal, doesn't matter. If on this election they feel like, they're just not feeling it, then they're the ones that are most likely to not bother standing in line that day. And so, yeah, you're right. It looks as though the Conservative Party's base they have a sort of a solid bedrock around 35 to 40% that just doesn't move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's very interesting to see that. And I think the main problem for Andrew Scheer is not a problem of his own making. It's a guy named Doug Ford. Mm-hmm. And in that seat-rich Ontario belt around Toronto, in which the Conservatives have to break through in order to have a chance to form a majority government, Doug Ford is becoming more and more poisonous as a brand. I don't know how they counter that, except, trying to show Andrew Scheer as much as possible to the public, because if you actually watch Andrew Scheer, if you listen to Andrew Scheer is many things. He's not a Doug Ford clone. You couldn't find two personalities more diametrically opposed. I do think that might be the avenue to go. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to picture the Liberals winning any seats, from essentially Cloverdale outside Surrey all the way to Thunder Bay. Like, it's hard to pick out, okay, how are they going to win more than 2 or 3 seats in that patch of the country? It sounds like the Atlantic provinces are tightening, and if the Greens break through on Vancouver Island, and there's a lot of ifs, but that Liberal path, even though they have a pretty commanding majority today, they're going to bleed a bunch of seats. And the question is, are they going to bleed so many seats that they end up in a minority, or are they going to bleed so many seats that they end up in opposition?
Well, that seems to be sort of the wisdom right now, is that we're looking at possibly a Liberal minority government just because of where the support lies geographically in the country. We shall see. I mean, that would be kind of, that's the sort of the Hail Mary solution for Jagmeet Singh, isn't it? Right? I mean, he's dropping in the polls. A lot of people are predicting a complete collapse of that party. If they were suddenly in a position of propping up a Liberal minority government, that would change in a hurry.
But do you think Sven Robinson's really going to let Jagmeet Singh lead the party and negotiate this deal?
No, probably not. Every time Sven's in the media, it's kind of bad news for his own party.
Yeah, well, and it's a bad reminder of the bad old days in the NDP world. So, it'll be interesting to see more. The more polls that come out, again showing that race tightening. You do wonder if Trudeau's having a little bit of a, and this is like maybe the worst analogy in politics, a dead cat bounce. Like, is there a worse analogy than that? A worse metaphor than that? But it is. I'm sorry, folks, if you're not into politics. Dead cat bounce is a real thing that political backrooms talk about. The question is this slight rebound that Trudeau's having right now, is it a sign that he can get back to that 40% level that he's going to need in order to form a majority government, or is it just a dead cat bounce because he can't fall any further?
We do need a better analogy. But
I'm a dog person, so that compounds how dirty I feel by saying dead cat bounce. But
anything bounce it's a terrible visual. Yes. Let's talk. You mentioned NDP World. I wanted to talk about that and sort of my Ripple story this week, and that's the gas price inquiry here in BC. Today, I gather 4 of the oil and gas companies in question are going to be answering questions in the Star Chamber.
Wait, before you go any further. How do you picture these oil executives coming in? They've got $100 bills. They're burning them with light cigars and talking to the rubes about how, I'm pretty sure, right? Monocles, spats. Mm-hmm.
Probably arriving via helicopter. I mean, that's what they do,
well,
right?
I mean, I would assume so.
Yeah, cackling as they tie damsels in distress to railroad tracks, that kind of thing. Now, Mike Smith had a fantastic piece in today's Province. I encourage you to read it. And he sort of talks about what's going to happen next after the gas inquiry, because John Horgan has convinced a fair number of people, mostly in his party, that British Columbians are paying too much for gas because they're being gouged by the oil and gas companies. But there's another, and I suspect larger group of people who look at the evidence and say, well, no, I don't think that's what that is. It seems to be pretty clearly a case of high demand and pinched supply, with other factors as well, including just like seasonal demand, things like that. But the thing that everyone can agree on is that the price of gas is probably too high. And so he's kind of created a situation where he's going to have to do something, because whether you believe the oil and gas companies are gouging you, or if you believe that the taxes are unsustainably high, both of those groups of people agreed that only one person can do something about it, and that's Premier John Horgan. And so he's kind of created a situation where he's going to have to do something, because inaction, just whatever these gas price inquiry reveals, or indeed independent data reveals, the only person who can do something about it is him.
Yeah, and look, he blundered this file in the spring. I think it's fair to say it was one of the things that his government has been the absolute weakest on. He could not, communicate to the public why they were paying so much. He could not find the reason he could not find a way to answer the tough questions in question period. He showed himself to be very thin-skinned with the, Horgan billboards that the BC Liberals put up. It's probably one of the strongest issues the BC Liberals tackled as opposition. So you have all that kind of happening. So what he does is he calls this commission essentially to punt it down the road, but eventually the punt comes down. So the punt goes in the air, and you can have all the hang time you want, and we've had months of hang time, but eventually it's coming. It's going to hit the ground. The question, you're right, is what does he do? He has 55 cents per liter of gas taxes that he has brought in, or that the province and federal government levies. He seems very reluctant to shift the blame to the feds. I've said it a dozen times, I don't know why he doesn't lead a stop the tax on tax campaign and go after the feds on GST. Why are we paying GST not only on the fuel but on the other taxes charged on the fuel? That to me is like low-hanging fruit.
And he would have a point.
Yeah, if federal election campaign, he should have, they should have their little, petition website, tell Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer no more tax on tax. Like, this isn't rocket science, right? Like, I don't understand what the problem is there. But yeah, you're right. He's going to have to do something, and it's got to be something substantive that actually knocks the price down a few cents pretty quickly. But to use another analogy, he doesn't seem to have a lot of tools in that toolkit to do much.
No, and let's say that his inquiry comes back and says, we do think there is gouging going on. There isn't, but let's say they come back and they give John Horgan the answer he wants. John Horgan is not dumb. He knows that that's not what's actually happening. But if he has public evidence now indicating that it is the case, what do? Do you then suddenly regulate the price of gas and in all likelihood drive a whole bunch of gas stations out of business? That's not a long-term solution, and I think there would be just enough time in between taking that action and gas stations closing that people would, they'd notice, put it that way.
Yes, no, I fully agree. All right, it'll be interesting to see that. Maclean, what's hot, what's cold this week? I gotta tell you, I am really I'm digging the 50th anniversary coverage of Apollo 11, the landing on the moon. Everything from like the Vancouver Sun tweeting out, their day of coverage where they renamed the paper from the sun to the moon. Love it. That was outstanding. Yeah. Whoever was the editor 50 years ago, the Vancouver Sun decided that. Outstanding. Well done. It's fantastic. I'm loving the multiple space documentaries on every science channel on TV. I've been watching the American Experience series of documentaries. There's one on Discovery. There's a History Channel. They're all going all in. Yeah. Nice to see Buzz Aldrin still around, doing one more victory lap at 50 years after landing on the moon. The thing I come back to, like, Maclean, is these astronauts, like Armstrong, Collins, and Aldrin, they were crazy. Like, they're getting into this thing that's basically tinfoil and duct tape and going to the friggin' moon on, like, calculate, like, punch card computers and calculation. Like, oh my God, like, the courage involved. Like, because we haven't pressed on with space and gone on to Mars or other unexplored territories, and because the Earth has been so well mapped and documented now, we've lost that sense of like exciting exploration that they had back then. Amazing to see what it was like back then, and I'm all for let's get the Space Force up and running, Maclean. Let's go to Mars. Let's continue to push the boundaries of human civilization and explore what's near us in the universe.
Here, could not agree more. Vaughn Palmer and I, a few months ago, went to go see a NASA engineer named Kobe Boykins speak here in Victoria. He is one of the leaders of the Mars rover project that's still going on as we speak. And yeah, it's just stirring stuff. You want to be alive when we eventually send someone to go land on Mars. I sincerely hope that happens.
Yeah, it's incredible. And, yeah, it's fun to see these. It's fun to talk about space again, right? Like, it's exciting stuff.
It's cool.
It is. Look at us. See my geeky childhood, space camp. It's all coming back. We're not
even talking about the CFL. Normally, that's when we get all geeky and too excited.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I don't want to talk about the CFL anymore. BC Lions fan. I just want to avoid that topic as much as possible.
Fair enough.
I have tickets for the game next weekend, the back half of the home and home against the Riders. So, God, I'm hoping it's not going to be a disaster.
I think you'll be okay, but we shall see. Hey, speaking of think you'll be okay, the person I want to talk about, the hottest person in Canadian politics this week, not a politician.
The Prince of Darkness.
The Prince of Darkness, Warren Kinsella. Look, here's the thing. He's the hottest person in politics right now because everyone's talking about him. And the way I see it, he's kind of finagled himself into a no-lose situation, right? I mean, he's in the Green Party war room, and there's three things that can possibly happen. A, the Greens have their breakthrough, and we can decide on what that means. I mean, even if it's 4 or 5 seats, that's quintupling the number of seats they have now. That would be impressive. He would, let's be honest, take a lot of credit for that if that happened. If it doesn't happen, the problem was too great for anyone to solve, and the issue is really the leader, because how many elections have we had now where the vote share keeps going down? The problem is in the leader.
Or I told them, that crazy platform. Adam Sterling has a great tweet thread on the crazy green platform.
Yeah, well, I want to get to that.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. And the third possibility is that he gets fired partway through between now and now. And I think this is a real possibility.
That's the most likely possibility.
Yeah, because, I mean, Warren Kinsella, and I'm not saying this with the criticism, his public persona is, I don't think he'd argue with me, is kind of being a bit of an asshole. I mean, he's very aggressive. That's why they're bringing him on. Yeah. But if they decide he crosses some imaginary line between now and Election Day, that's fine. I think Warren is perfectly okay with saying, I was just too nasty for the Green Party. They were afraid of me, and they weren't willing to roll their sleeves up and get dirty. I think he's just fine with that. I don't really see a realistic third possibility here, and in all of them, he, for somebody who hasn't really had a big win on the federal stage since the 90s, this is a big splash.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. It'll be interesting to watch. My prediction is he gets fired, not because he's not doing his job, but because he is doing his job too well. And that just will not fit in with the nice, kindly, grandmotherly, eco-grandma vibe that that party seems to want to project.
And that's what I want to talk about for my coldest politician in Canada this week.
Let's go into that right now. Go into the coldest politician. Yeah.
Well, and it's Elizabeth May, because you mentioned Adam Sterling having a big tweet storm. Because the Greens have sort of never really been, I'm going to take some heat for this, but never really been taken seriously as a viable option before. They've been sort of a safe protest vote. You can feel good about voting for Elizabeth May because she wants good things for Canada. But now that they're sort of, there's a real possibility of them becoming the new third party, because the NDP supports in free fall, their platform is suddenly being taken very seriously and looked at in some detail. And it's not just Adam Sterling. It's Andrew Leach and Professor Kevin Milligan at UBC, who are going through some of the Greens' energy policies and saying that this is simply wrong. It's as Maxime Bernier's policies are actually just as indefensible, and in some ways more defensible than what the Greens are saying. So Elizabeth May's gotten kind of a free ride for about 10 years. She's how many times has she been named Canada's top parliamentarian? And no one's ever really looked at the finer points of her policy platform. So she's kind of taking it on all sides this week. She's getting a well-deserved criticism for some extremely ill-thought-out and poorly detailed policy platforms, which again are not even in the realm of being real. But she's also kind of taken some heat from her own supporters for bringing on Warren Kinsella, because he is such a departure from the image that the Greens like to project about how they do politics differently. Well, nobody does politics the same way as everyone else better than the Prince of Darkness himself, Warren Kinsella. So we talked about how Kinsella's in a no-lose situation. I don't think Elizabeth May is I think she's in a no-win situation.
Well, it's also a lesson to Andrew Weaver. Like, you better have a realistic, rational platform for this next provincial election, or you're going to get crushed, because for the first time, the media is actually going to look at it. I remember looking at the Green platform last time, and it was something like they wanted to triple the property transfer tax, which might be the most unpopular tax in BC. Crazy stuff in it, and it was so crazy, like you almost didn't know where to start to debunk this stuff. This is a lesson. Andrew Weaver's got to make sure that he has a better platform. Look, I want to say one other thing about Warren Kinsella being in the Green Party. I'm hopeful. Like, Warren Kinsella is one of the country's leading advocates and protectors of against anti-Semitism, like for recognizing the contributions and the struggles of the Jewish people.
Absolutely.
The Green Party has had more than its fair share of crazy, racist, anti-Semitic characters floating about, sometimes becoming candidates, sometimes becoming executive members, sometimes trying to seed stuff into platforms. If nothing else occurs from this whole thing, then Warren Kinsella can get to the root of that and root it out of the Green Party. Then he'll have done a great service, I think, to Canadian politics. So, again, I see a lot of, or not everyone, but I see a number of people commenting and criticizing Elizabeth May for bringing him on, and I do sometimes wonder if there's some concerns there that maybe Kinsella might not put up with the same kind of nonsense that they've been trying to get away with for a long time. That said, I think he's fired by September 30th.
I agree with you. I do think that there's going to be a parting of the ways. They won't call it a firing; it'll be mutual.
Right.
But yeah, I think that is the most likely outcome. The more cynical reason is I don't think the Greens want or know what to do with a situation where someone other than Elizabeth May is getting any attention whatsoever. They have been the Elizabeth May party for more than 10 years.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I also think their checks will bounce. All right, my hot, I did my hot 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. My cold BC forest communities. Nelson Bennett in Business in Vancouver today has a great piece. Well, I call it a great piece because it's well written and well researched, but it's a rough piece. About interior towns losing some of these jobs. For example, 100 Mile House, population 1,800, they're losing 400 jobs because of the forestry downturn. We've talked about Vavenby many times. A town of 700 losing 170 jobs. That would be equal to the township of Langley, where I live, losing 30,000 jobs, which is just crazy to think about. This is bad. This is bad right now in the forestry communities. I know this is the number one issue of this week. I've talked to a few BC Liberal MLAs on some other issues. The interior MLAs, they're almost setting their hair on fire. They're like, we can't seem to get any kind of attention for these issues down the Lower Mainland or in Victoria. Like, no one seems to care that these communities are being gutted. We care. I think when British Columbians as a whole, when the urban BC will start to care, is when we actually start to see the effect it has on the economy. And I went back and looked at the BC budget today, and it's built on, Carol James's budget is built on the idea that there'll be a 2.4% economic growth rate this year, and I believe it's 2.3 next year. Mm-hmm. I wonder, with the forestry downturn, with the real estate downturn, with the downturn in housing starts, I wonder if they're going to hit that 2.4%. My suspicion is they're not, and then that will mean some more belt tightening happening in Victoria, or it'll mean some deficit budgets.
I think you're exactly right, and the way you mentioned forestry, you mentioned real estate. These are major drivers of some of the recent budget surpluses. I mean, this is not a secret that's there in the budget documents. So for there to be a downturn in them, even if you think a downturn in real estate is a good thing, that's fine. It still means less money into provincial coffers, no matter how it's happening. So yeah, it's difficult to see a world in which the BC continues on the same growth as it has before, and that is going to have very real consequences for the provincial treasury, no matter who's in charge.
Yeah, no, exactly right. So, over the next few years, she'd projected a kind of not a downturn, but a tailing off of growth by 2022, 2023. She was talking more like 2.0% rather than kind of 2.4, which is, very robust, leading in Canada growth rate. I'm very curious what a guy like Jock Finlayson would say, what he thinks this number is headed towards, because I'm no economist, but I just kind of do the math off the top of my head. If you have all these forestry companies curtailing, if you have sawmills closing, you don't have LNG Canada yet doing anything, you don't have Trans Mountain started yet, and then these real estate numbers. Yeah, I think I'll be very surprised, pleasantly, but very surprised if they hit that 2.4% growth rate that was budgeted.
But isn't that going to be funny where we're going to be in a world where the NDP are going to be, at the very least, quietly hoping that LNG Canada and Trans Mountain hurry up and get started because they're going to need the economic activity?
Yes. What a world we're in, and that is why Andrew Weaver just probably shakes his head constantly at what's happening.
That's probably true.
How did he end up here? By the way, Andrew Weaver, one last thing I want to say on it. We're talking about Andrew Weaver and LNG. My favorite headline of the week, FortisBC's signed a long-term deal to export LNG to China from the Tilbury plant. First of all, it's a good reminder of two things. Number one Dr. Weaver claiming LNG industry in Canada was a unicorn, a pipe dream. Well, Tilbury's been up and running for years. And now has a deal to send to China. And second of all, for years he's been running around saying there's no market for LNG in Asia. Bollocks. China's just signed a deal, and they're going to sign a whole bunch more once LNG Canada is coming on stream. So, don't just as a general rule of thumb, don't take investment advice from Green Party leaders. Anything else?
No, I think we have, that's probably all this is going to be the most green content heavy edition of BC Poly Hot Stove yet.
I know, we need something to happen this week. I guess we'll have BC Utilities Commission stuff we can talk about next week.
Yeah. And there might be news coming from the gas inquiry, or the revelations coming from some of the testimony, or the oil and gas companies sharing how the other points they're bringing up are being ignored. Something.
Yeah, we'll have something, folks. So that'll be next week. We'll be back for another BC Poly Hot Stove. And thanks for watching. Thanks for listening on the Orca Podcast Network.
Have a good week.